Hello everyone, and welcome to today's webinar on EDI integration for J.D. Edwards applications. This is Jim O'Leary from Extol. Let me just take a minute to introduce our topic today and why it might be relevant to your business. When we talk to businesses about what's driving them to change the way they implement EDI, one change driver that comes up repeatedly is a current or a planned upgrade to an enterprise application system. Upgrading EnterpriseOne or any ERP gives you a rare opportunity really to modernize EDI integration because upgrades can introduce changes to business processes, documents, and interface options. And about 1/3 of current EnterpriseOne licensees are using unsupported versions, so there's a good chance that some of you might be facing such an upgrade. Now, of course, there are other possible reasons to rethink your EDI approach, including the need to onboard partners faster, the need for improved visibility and exception management, and the need to provide new capabilities for important trading partners. So whatever your situation might be, it's our goal today for this webinar to offer some ideas that you can use in your next EDI integration project. So here's what we have in store for the next 30 minutes or so. I'll start with a brief overview of EDI integration with EnterpriseOne to establish a few key concepts and terms. Then I'll turn the floor over to my webinar co-host, Sean Hoppe. Sean has many years of experience using Extol products in J.D. Edwards integration projects and is the developer of our new J.D. Edwards integration offering. Sean will be taking us through some best practices that he recommends when integrating EDI partners with EnterpriseOne. Then I'll introduce Extol's new J.D. Edwards integration solution, which is based on our Extol Business Integrator middleware platform. Finally, Sean will talk a bit about the customizable inbound and outbound transactions that are included with our solution before we wrap up with your questions. So if you think of a question you'd like us to address at the end, please type it into the GoToWebinar chat pane and we'll answer it during the Q&A section. Let's take a look at how EDI integration with J.D. Edwards works. And I'm going to use this simple diagram that shows the main elements of EDI integration, starting at the top, where we see customers, vendors, and other trading partners with whom you exchange EDI and other kinds of electronic documents. Now, typically, those documents are transported using standard AS2 communications or value-added network services or secure file transfer. And then at the lower right, we see the EnterpriseOne application system, which includes the database in which application data are maintained. Now, EnterpriseOne exposes multiple interfaces for integration with external systems. For EDI integration, the standard J.D. Edwards interface is called the Data Interface for Electronic Data Interchange. And that interface consists of a set of database tables which are identified using the code prefix F47. So you'll hear us refer to F47 tables throughout this presentation. The F47 tables provide a safe, supported means to stage EDI input and output data, in other words, to pass it in and out of EnterpriseOne without directly modifying live production data. Now, the EDI integration middleware box at the lower left represents the mediating services that we offer, like in Extol Business Integrator for managing inbound and outbound communications, transforming EDI and other kinds of data, and implementing process automation and other integration functions. So those are the basic elements of EDI integration for J.D. Edwards. But there's a lot more to integrating EDI with J.D. Edwards than just those mechanics. For example, there's the fundamental question of what you have to start with when creating new J.D. Edwards integrations. Now, the extreme case is coding integrations from scratch using some programming language. But even with modern integration middleware like Extol Business Integrator, creating maps and business processes and other integration elements from scratch does take time. And having the right kind of pre-built parts can make the job far easier and faster, and also reduce errors. The second challenge is designing for reuse. And when it comes time to onboarding a new trading partner, you'll want to make use of integration assets from previous onboarding efforts rather than creating new integrations from the ground up. And that requires thinking about reuse in advance and taking advantage of platform features that make reuse easier. The third challenge is planning for additional unforeseen requirements, like upgrading to newer EDI versions, or sending carbon copies of documents, or supporting non-EDI document types, adding partner-specific processing tasks, or any number of other possibilities. Meeting this challenge requires both the flexibility to accommodate changes easily and the power in the platform itself to support a wide range of partner requirements. And finally, there's the need to understand and apply integration best practices for each application domain. EnterpriseOne incorporates a number of features that are designed to make integration easier to manage and maintain. But of course, you need to know about those features and understand how to use them in order to exploit them. So that's what we'll be talking about next, integration best practices. That's a design point that Sean paid special attention to when developing the new enterprise adapter for JD Edwards. So let me turn the floor over to Sean to talk about some of the best practices that he recommends when integrating with EnterpriseOne. Sean?
We're going to be looking at our best practices. We're going to be addressing 4 of the best practices in the next several slides. And we found that these best practices have helped us immensely when it comes time to implementation of JD Edwards, and not just an Extol B2B solution, but any B2B solution. Looking at our first one, we're going to be looking at the address master. The address book contains some critical information that we need, and the JD Edwards address book system maintains information about companies and people we do business with. It contains company names, contact names, addresses, phone numbers, notes, and so forth. By using our best practice here with Address Book Master, we can externalize our data, meaning we can leverage JD Edwards instead of maintaining duplicate data within our EDI system. And in doing so, we leverage the Who's Who table. By leveraging the Who's Who table, we can show that we can keep customer data internal to JD Edwards and out of our translator, our B2B solution. A couple of the benefits, critical, is putting the onus on the business units, not the IT departments. When we put the onus on the IT departments, we find that the IT group owns the data, and the IT group shouldn't own the data. The business units should own the data. And when we externalize the data with JD Edwards, we can also ensure that we have accuracy within the sold to, the branch plant, and other dependent lookups once we're able to identify our address book number. Sometimes by not going through this best practice, we sometimes find ourselves using the ABAL key. And the ABAL key, for the people that are not familiar, is a field. It's the alternative key within the address book, and this key is used across. This field is used across all customers in the address book, and sometimes cannot be customizable enough. The other alternative is using a crosswalk table within the our B2B solution. And when we use a crosswalk table, that means the IT group has to own the data, and that's sometimes not feasible in this day and age. We have examples, and in examples we have our inbound data. So for example, when we receive a ship to number in an inbound 850 and we have to determine the address book number, we can probably chain out to our Who's Who table to get our address book number, opposed to using an internal crosswalk table. And in our package that Jim alluded to, we have several examples in almost all the maps where we do this in our inbound maps. And in our outbound maps, we use the same theory where we have the address book number, we externalize our data within the from the Who's Who table, and by knowing our address book number, we can determine our ship to number. We'll look at, this is the hierarchy. This is JD Edwards hierarchy of our address book information here. So once we are able to determine our address book number, all these tables come into play, and with the way Extol allows us to externalize data, we can create customizable SQL queries through the Studio, the Extol Studio, and we can very easily access any of these pieces of information that we need. And in doing so, we can put forth the best practice of keeping the data within JD Edwards and out of the B2B solution, where we should more so use our logic. Moving to the next slide, we're going to be looking at the best practice of the item cross-reference. The JD Edwards item cross-reference table, commonly known as the F4104, is where JD Edwards stores the item descriptions that the item search program P41200 uses. Just as JD Edwards uses this table to retrieve customer-specific information, B2B solutions can also use this table to determine the JD Edwards short item number. Using the F4104 table is a best practice for multiple reasons. So looking at our reasons here, we don't have to, just like the address book numbers, we don't have to maintain the data within our B2B solution. We can use it, we can have one copy of it and it stays within JD Edwards, and the onus is kept off of the IT group of owning the data. Because once we own the data, it's very hard to relinquish it, and nobody wants to take ownership of it after the fact we go live. And on top of it, the inventory management system, which the F4104 encompasses, it falls into, this data can be maintained easily, backed up within the 4104 table. Once we use the F4104 table, for example, on the inbound, we know our short item number. From there, we can do our unit and measure conversions. We can find out category codes, and we can also parlay that and go find the F4101 entry to find additional information to help drive our internal transactions. I found in the past that some people choose to use a crosswalk table within their B2B solution. Sometimes that might not be the most efficient way because, again, the data has to be owned by the IT group. Moving to our next slide, please. We're going to be looking at the best practice of implied decimal data fields. As most people know who have implemented data in the past, decimal positions are not stored within JD, are not stored within the 47 tables. They're stored within the data dictionary. The data dictionary is a central repository that contains the data items that are used within Edwards. Each data item in the dictionary is defined by a number of attributes, and one of them is the decimal positions. In our best practice here at Extol, we found that we can leverage the data dictionary, which is the F9210 field, to ensure consistent handling of the implied data decimal fields. One of the biggest benefits is in using our best practices that we can reduce the development time, because if we don't, what we do is we globalize these values by putting them into the back end in what we call the schemas. But in doing so, we don't have to worry about this within our mapping of the data. Previously, and I have seen it before, is where people multiply, divide by 100, by 1,000, just to be able to meet this certain data decimal position, and that it's effective, but it would have to be done on a map basis. And here we do it at a global level. And looking at our examples, the outbound, for example, here, the UPRC field, it's a 4 assumed decimal positions. What we do is we globalize this kind of information, and when we create our outbound maps, it's assumed that it's always 4, and we don't have to take it upon ourselves to always do any specific hard coding at every single mapping step to ensure it's 4 decimals. And the same goes for inbound. For inbound, if we have to deal with quantities, these fields are shown here in the slide are usually a 3 assumed decimal positions. And by globalizing this information, we are ensuring ourselves that this update only has to be done once, and it can be applied across the board. Moving to the next slide, please. We're going to be looking at transaction data turnaround. A best practice that we use all the time would be to utilize JD Edwards secondary and tertiary tables that data analysts can create, which would be the F55 through F59 series tables. And using these tables would allow analysts, JD Edwards users, to create the tables internally to Extol using the JD Edwards table design add 8, sorry about that. Once these tables are created, they can be externalized to Extol, and we can Extol then can then interface with them to capture inbound data, and then return it on the outbound of the outbound transaction. Not using these tables, or one of the biggest benefits of using them, is we can satisfy data requirements. For example, there are some trading partners that require the customer item number to be returned to them on an inbound from an inbound purchase order. When the customer item number is not returned, it is then we are not meeting the business requirements, such as from the 810 or the 856. We are then able to, by using these tables here, we are then able to return the data. If we don't use these tables, we might then require to hard code the data. If we hard code the data, we can't guarantee any consistency with the trading partner. So looking at the examples here, if a customer sends a customer item number and we try to map it into our 47 table, such as the CITM field, the CITM field does not appear in the 4211, which is our sales order files. Well, we still need to capture it one way or the other to return it on the 810 or the 856 if we were to send an outbound invoice or an outbound 856. What we would be able to do then is use the F55 and F59 series tables to be able to capture that data and return it. Moving to our next slide, please. Jim is going to look at our other remaining best practices here.
Okay, great. Thank you, Sean. So the best practices that Sean just covered are important examples, but they aren't the end of the story, of course. There are additional integration design practices that make sense to observe, whether you're integrating with EnterpriseOne or SAP or any other application system. And we see some examples here, like explicitly trapping and handling all process exceptions, centralizing and standardizing error notifications, and using consistent logical naming conventions when creating integration artifacts. Now, there are two ways to exploit the best practices that Sean covered, and also the ones you see here. The first way is to explicitly include them when you build your document schemas and maps and business processes and other integration objects. The second way is to reuse integrations that have those best practices built in. And really, that's the approach that we're advocating in this webinar today. And I'll be talking about how the J.D. Edwards solution that we're offering does that in just a minute. Now, I do want to mention, though, that there are some additional best practices that you might not even think of as best practices, but they're really observed at the integration platform level, like exploiting database metadata to detect and adjust to schema changes that are introduced by EnterpriseOne upgrades, or centralizing the configuration and management of resource integration, communications, file governance, and other integration services, or automated logging and tracking of integration activities. And again, these are built-in capabilities, so the point is that you don't have to think about using them. Now, the kinds of capabilities that you see here can vary, of course, based on the middleware that you choose to use for integration. So I want to move on next, sort of move from the theory of best practices to the implementation of best practices, and take a look at how Extol's EDI integration solution for EnterpriseOne works. Now, we took a brief look at Extol Business Integrator, or again, EBI for short, earlier, in the context of our overall product offerings. This diagram shows the main components of the EBI system and the relationship to internal and external resources. EBI is, first of all, a unified middleware product and tool set for integrating trading partners, applications, and enterprise data in any combination. It includes process automation, adapters for external communication and internal resource integration, and powerful data transformation support for EDI, XML, database, flat file, and spreadsheet data. It comes with all the components that you need for business integration, including the EBI Studio, which you see on the left, and the EBI dashboard on the right. EBI Studio is an advanced design time tool set for creating and maintaining EDI and other integration processes without coding. And EBI Dashboard is a comprehensive web-based application for monitoring and reporting on integration activities. So EBI is the platform on which the J.D. Edwards solution I'll be talking about next rests. And we call that solution the Extol Enterprise Adapter for J.D. Edwards. Again, a very long name, so I'm going to abbreviate that, EEA for JDE, so Enterprise Adapter for J.D. Edwards. EEA for JDE consists of customizable integrations for the most common variations of X12 EDI order-to-cash transactions, and that includes orders and order changes, invoices, advance ship notices, lockbox transactions, and more. Sean will be taking us through those here in just a bit. Now, these integrations are the result of years of real-world integration engagements and refinement, and they're designed to address, again, the most common implementation variations that we've seen. As part of the product installation, you can see circled there in red at the lower left, Extol configures EEA for JDE for you so that it works in your environment. Mostly this entails the configuration of document schemas and adapters for your specific J.D. Edwards version. But if you're using JDE World, or you're using DB2 or MS SQL Server instead of Oracle as your database, Extol can configure the product to work with those environments as well. Now let me make one more important point before we talk about how you use the EEA for JDE product. If you need to create integrations for Edifact or XML or flat files or other cases that are not included in the EEA for JDE objects, you can do that by using the native standards and document syntax support that's built into Extol Business Integrator. The main difference is that you configure the required integrations using base EDI objects like business processes and adapters and maps, rather than customizing pre-built integrations. So it's important to note that you can do other things without going outside the environment we're talking about here. Okay, now let's talk a little bit about how you use EEA for JDE. And really that involves just a few steps. And the first one is to select and customize the objects for the integrations that you need to create from the EEA for JDE package, and test the resulting integrations using EBI Studio. And we'll see what that entails on the next two slides. The second step, once your integration is customized and tested, is to deploy to a test or production environment using utilities included with Extol Business Integrator. And then you can run your integration by activating it on a schedule or triggering it with an event like an inbound AS2 message arrival event, or executing it on demand. And once activated, integrations execute in a fully automated and lights-out fashion under the control of the EBI process engine. And finally, you can use the EBI dashboard to monitor and report on the results of integration execution. Okay, now I mentioned that EEA for JDE consists of customizable integrations, and this diagram shows the default pattern for inbound EDI integrations, consisting of a launcher process on the left that manages inbound communications and initiates EDI processing, and a collection of collaboration business processes on the right that process individual EDI transactions like order transactions or invoice transactions according to the needs of your business. You create integrations based on this pattern by customizing pre-built objects that implement the green shaded functions and configuring new objects that implement the blue shaded functions. So basically it's a process of customizing existing objects in the EEA for JDE package and then adding a few additional options to connect the pieces. You can extend this pattern to include additional processes and process tasks. For example, EEA for JDE integrations include a standard error notification process, but you can also send information to additional applications or raise events that trigger other downstream processes or perform any other process required by your business. And similarly, there's a default pattern for outbound EDI integrations. And again, you create integrations based on this pattern by customizing the pre-built objects that implement the green shaded functions and configuring new objects that implement the blue shaded functions. The two patterns that I just covered are really all you need in order to onboard any trading partner that sends and receives X12 EDI. Okay, now let me turn the floor back over to Sean to go into some more detail about the inbound and outbound integrations that are included with the EEA for JDE product.
Let's start with inbound. Inbound, we have 8 EDI integrations, and then we're going to be looking at outbound, and on outbound we have 10 outbound integrations. But in looking at these inbound integrations, we're trying to encompass, as Jim mentioned, our order-to-cash transactions and also procurement transactions. And when we say procurement, we're meaning outbound purchase orders, and then inbound, maybe ASNs, and maybe our inbound purchase order acknowledgments, which are our 855s, and inbound ASNs are 856s. These are our, as you can see, these are inbound transactions, and these are the target tables that we interface with within JD Edwards E1. Let's move to our next slide. In our next slide, we're going to be looking at the inbound 850. And in the inbound 850, this is a generic sized one for Lowe's. And using our best practices for our inbound example here, we're taking the N1. Let's take the N104. With the N104, we have the Lowe's location of 00440. Using our best practice of the address book, we were able to externalize the data from JD Edwards and then determine the SHAN, which is our ship to address book number, to be 345789. Likewise, we go down at the detail level and we apply our best practice again to determine the short item number. The short item number, we get the customer item number of 424173, and with our inbound, within our package here, this inbound 850, we're able to determine the short item number is 134566. Now these best practices that we talked about before are found throughout all our transactions here for our inbound and outbound maps. Let's move to our next slide, please. In our next slide, we're going to be looking at our 10 outbound EDI transactions. As you can see, we have 4 outbound 856 maps, and as most people know here in EDI world, we have some people doing the pick and pack, and we have some people doing the non-pick and pack. But we try to help our customers where it's sometimes difficult for most, even myself, to sometimes set them up from scratch. And we found that by providing Extol customers with these kind of setups, it helps them get their feet running. And we not only with generic maps, we also help them apply best practices. So let's move to our next slide, and we'll look and see how we apply one of our other best practices here for the Lowe's Outbound 810. For Lowe's Outbound 810, we need to supply them with their ship-to location of 00440. This information from our best practice is contained within the Who's Who, which is the FO111 table within Edwards. And what we do is we take our ship-to address book number of 345789, go out to our Who's Who table, and then determine that we need to send back the 00440 for Lowe's to determine what the actual ship-to location is. And here is another way that we can apply our best practices in our the EEA for JD Edwards. And from here, I will hand it off to Jim.
Okay, thank you, Sean. As we wrap up our prepared material, I just want to say a couple of things about the value that the inbound and outbound integrations that Sean just covered really provide. First of all, unlike platform-only solutions that lack working integrations, and here I'm talking about integration products that have the capability to integrate with JD Edwards but don't provide the pre-built starting point for you to customize your own. EEA for JD Edwards includes logical database schemas that predefine the combinations of JD Edwards tables that you need for each transaction, and pre-configured database adapters for accessing data, and pre-built customized maps, and pre-built business processes that tie everything together, and so on. So the real value, again, is that with that starting point and with the built-in best practices, you get a big head start over starting with just base level objects. And unlike integration solutions that offer libraries that contain thousands of overlapping integration examples from years of consulting projects, EEA for JDE is really designed for customization. There aren't 50 different purchase order maps to choose from. There's just one that contains the most commonly needed mapping rules, which you can easily customize or prune. And for cases in which multiple options make sense, like advanced ship notices, Sean has carefully implemented and documented all those cases to make it easy to deliver exactly the behavior you need for each partner in each case. So given the limited time that we have today, it's really difficult, of course, to get a full appreciation for all the capabilities that we've talked about. So if you'd like to find out more, we encourage you to contact us for a discussion about your JD Edwards integration needs, or schedule a demonstration of the EDI platform and EDI Studio products that provides the foundation for the JD Edwards integration.